I my first wife I met, oh my word, too many years ago. There is so much water under the bridge. And my eldest daughter, who is now 36, got married on Friday. So in theory, other than the odd family gathering, I haven't had to see my ex-wife for years and years and years. But now that the wedding's out of the way, I have a chance to explain what went on in our breakup. I met my wife, or my ex-wife, my first wife, when I was probably about 24, I think I was, 23, 24. And she came down, and I honestly, now looking back in hindsight, all her other boyfriends had been reasonably wealthy. One of them was even vain enough to have bought himself a title of Lord. And although I don't come from a wealthy background, and I come from a council estate in London, but the time I had grown up, my dad had done really, really well for himself, so I'm sure that she saw money. And we got along through a mutual friend, and within 9 months, I think it was about 9 months, she asked me to marry her. And we did, we got married. And within 3 months of us being married, she was having an affair, because she had met someone whose parents had potentially come into a lot of money. And I found out, it was really strange, because we got married and life became really awkward at home. And it got to the point where I didn't want to go home anymore because it was so fucking miserable. And perhaps she made it miserable because she was unhappy. That's probably what she'll say. But regardless, she was having an affair after 3 months of our marriage. And one Christmas Eve, we was out with friends at a party, and the clock struck 12, and she run home crying. And I chased after her. It was only down the road. And I found out that she had had this affair. She told me, she said, I've had this affair, but I don't love him. I want to be with you. And she never wanted children, but she suggested that we have a child and start a family, and it might make us closer. Being young and naive, I agreed to that. Little did I know that the money that she thought he was coming into, he didn't come into. And there's parts of the story that I probably can't say, but she thought that she had landed the golden goose, and it didn't happen. So she stayed with me, and my eldest daughter came along, and she was an absolute blessing. And this carried on for a few more years. And then all of a sudden, the hostility slowly crept back into the relationship. And then it turns out that although he didn't get the money that he thought he was going to get, he had eventually come into some money, and he got himself straight, and they started the affair again. And then I came home one day, and the house had been ransacked. I thought it had been burgled. I'd come from work, walked through the door, and it was empty. And I went through the bedrooms, and I see all my kids' stuff gone, and her gone, and all the clothing gone, and I just knew. And there was that sickening feeling in the pit of my stomach that you just know what's going on. So anyhow, we ended up having quite an acrimonious divorce, the divorce lasted 5 years, simply because of her greed. She said she wanted everything. I offered to pay for private dental, private education, providing. She didn't come after me for all sorts of maintenance, and she said, no, I want the lot. She even said that she was going to try and get my shares of my dad's business. But anyway, none of that happened, and I actually went through the court system, and the divorce really was the easy part. But we fought for 5 years because I tried to get my daughter to live with me because she was my everything. During the time of her affair with this guy, my daughter spent most of her time with me and with my mum, and we didn't want to lose her. And there was even a time that she disappeared. She just disappeared for about 6 or 8 weeks, and I hunted high and low, and I tracked her down, and eventually I found her. So I know what it's like to have a woman disappear. Fortunately for me, she came back into my life because she'd been found and strong words were had. So I haven't been through what some of you guys have had, where you've lost your children for years on ends. And I have to say that when Cafcass got involved, they were good. But I am going back 30 years, and we had a Cafcass officer come and they interviewed me, and at the time I had moved out to my parents' house, and they interviewed my parents, and then they went away, and apparently they interviewed her and the new partner, and they came back and they went, yes, we understand, and how much, what a good life she could have with you, but unless she was a drug taking whore, there was very little chance of the court ever taking her away. And in the end, I had to sort of accept that. But Cafcass were fine, as far as I'm concerned. I suffered all the allegations. Back many years ago, we used to keep firearms. And firearms were, if you had the correct license and you belonged to the right clubs, they were legal. So of course I used to get all the accusations, and the police would stop me, or they'd come round and they'd ask, where have you been, what have you done? And I used to explain myself, and we lived in a small village, and it got to the point where they used to just pull me up in the street and go, hello Gary, where you been, what you been up to? So one day I actually handed in all of my firearms to the armoury at the police station, and she continued to make those allegations. So I was absolutely proven without a shadow of a doubt that she was just wasting police time. And there's a funny part of the story where they went round, kicked her door in at 2 o'clock in the morning and put her in a cell for the night and threatened her and said, you've got to stop all the allegations. Those were the good old sensible days of policing, which sadly today doesn't seem to happen. The police seem to have no common sense at all. So she did make threats of going and living a long way away, sort of 4, 5, 6 hours away. That never happened. But she did move about an hour away. Now, at the time, I used to see my daughter every Wednesday, every Saturday and every Sunday. So I was having it almost 50% of the time. And then one day I got a letter saying that had to stop because it wasn't convenient, it was disruptive. So we went to court, and typically the judge favoured the mother and ordered that I can only see my daughter once a fortnight. So I only got to see her twice a month. During the time that I was seeing on a regular basis, I'd arranged to go on holiday. And it wasn't far. It was only to see a relation who lived in Wales. And of course, she took my daughter out of play school because she wasn't at primary school at the time. And the following day, she thought I'd missed my holiday or I'd gone on holiday without my daughter, but the following day I went back there, and again, she hadn't taken her into school. So I went round there and I managed to get in through the back door, and I went upstairs and I took my daughter. The police came round and demanded to come in. Where my dad lived, he had a beautiful farm with stables and grooms and gardeners and a big set of electric gates and a pedestrian gate. And I think there was 2 police cars. I think there was dogs as well. Anyway, they all turned up. So they buzzed on the buzzer, said, "Can we come in?" And I said, "No, you can't." I said, "But I'll come and talk to you at the gate." So I went out there and they said that they just needed to make sure that the daughter was fine. So I said that I'll allow one of them to come in. So one of the officers followed me in the house, asked if he could take my daughter, and I said, "No, you cannot take my daughter." So my daughter was left with my mum and dad because it was their house, and they said they needed to interview me. So we went down to the police station. I was interviewed, and within 2 hours I was out and off and on my holiday. About halfway through the holiday, she said that my daughter had been kidnapped. I'd been kidnapped and I'd taken her abroad and she was never going to see her again. And I never knew this. They had something, or back then they had something called the kindergarten, and there was a warrant out for my arrest. So I simply said, well, call them back up and say that you've spoken to your client. He is not abroad. He won't tell me where I am, and he will be returning home on such and such a date, and he will hand the child back over. And I phoned the police up on the way home, and strangely enough, they weren't interested. But I said to the police, you have to turn up and you have to witness this, because if you don't, the chances are there's going to be an altercation on the doorstep. So because of those threats, they turned up. They turned up and they witnessed me hand over my child, and then I had about 6 weeks where I couldn't see her, and I had to go back to court and I had to get that injunction lifted, which they soon did, because they realised it was non-factual, more allegations. So other than that, it's been quite a peaceful time, and my daughter got to be about 30 years old, and all of a sudden she said, "I'm having a 30th birthday, Dad," because she'd moved into a new house and she was settling down with her long-term partner. And I said, "That's fantastic." She said, "But Mum and her partner will be there." I said, "Doesn't matter. Water under the bridge. It's so long ago. I can be in the same room as them." And I was. And they sat up one end of the room and I sat up the other. And she came over and spoke to pretty much most of my family, and I felt quite awkward. And I didn't want to talk to her. I didn't want to be a friend, if that makes sense. So a couple more parties go by, and I think it was, about 3 years later, she announced that she was going to get married. So on the Christmas Eve, when everyone was there, now bearing in mind my daughter was probably about 5 or 6 when she disappeared, and she's now 36 this year. So when she was 33, she announced that she was going to get married, and her partner, my ex's partner, I'd never ever spoken to him at all. We'd only, in my younger days when I was a lot more fiery, and I put my hands up, we used to shout and holler at one another. But it never ever came to fisticuffs, and I'm glad it didn't. And strangely, a few people that I know that knew of him said, "If you knew him, Gary, he's a really nice guy." but I didn't know him. And I'm sure he had only ever been told the stories that she wanted to tell him, and he didn't know me. So anyway, going back to the story, it was New Year's, and I knew we was going to get married, and I knew that he'd been her stepdad for many, many years, and I knew we was going to have this wedding. So I actually went up to him and I put my hand out and I said, Happy New Year. Lot of water under the bridge, and we shook hands, and he looked quite surprised because we'd never been civil or spoke to one another in all that time. So that was that. So we'd sort of like put that behind us, if you like. Now, my ex around that time had also split up from him, and they'd both gone their own ways, but they had done it amicably. And although they weren't married, he was very good, and they split everything up, and he made sure that she was well looked after. And he was in the room, and she asked me if I wanted to dance with her, and I just thought that was odd, and it made me uncomfortable, because how would dancing with me make this man feel? And she had no regard for that. So I said no. And we don't speak anyway, because isn't it strange how people can do the most vilest things to you, and then within a few years, because it's water under the bridge, just expect things to be as normal. They forget that everyone has a memory of just how shitty they were. Not that I wish her ill, I just don't need her in my life. So I don't think she we never sit down and talk. That's the majority of people's friends. We never sit down and talk. We never sit down with our exes and talk, or rarely. And so she was offended and she went away. So the wedding day's coming along, and there were glamping pods being put up, because when she left her partner, she went and bought 20 acres of land with a barn and converted the barn and did all sorts of other things, but the wedding was to be held at the mother's. So I then get the invitation, and I'm told that the mum is walking down the aisle, which not a problem. Anything that makes my daughter happy for her wedding day is fine for me. So the mother's going to walk her down the aisle, and me and her ex-partner are to walk her to the aisle. So that's fine. Then, because we don't really talk, about a month or two before the wedding, there was all these glamping pods put up, so people could stay overnight, have a nice drink, have a nice time, and stay in the glamping pods. They weren't free, they were like, I can't remember what they were now, a couple of £100, but you had to pay for them. So I said, that'd be nice. We could stay, and probably a lot of my family would have stayed, because we got quite a big family. So I get a very awkward message from my daughter saying that her mum doesn't want me staying. She feels uncomfortable. So I said, darling, that's fine. It's not going to ruin your day. Don't even think about it. I'll drive home. It's not a big deal. I couldn't stay in a hotel because the hotels are 20 minutes, 30 minutes away. So I might as well drive home as go to, to a hotel, and the taxi service in the middle of nowhere is non-existent. So none of my family stayed. None of my family stayed at the glamping pods. We all went now. There was probably about 20 of us, and then we all drove back home. The morning of the wedding, I get a message to say, oh, by the way, you can walk me halfway down the aisle, which I was absolutely made up over. I was over the moon with that. And I was told that I can also make a speech, which again made me very happy. So we've gone to the church and I walk her halfway down the aisle and the mother's sitting down and the stepfather takes her the other half, which I thought was a nice touch. I have no problem with that because after all, he's looked after her for many, many years. And he's been good to her, he's never been nasty. Hopefully, my ex warmed to me a little because when we got there, she walked into the church and I said good morning. And I don't normally speak to her, so she was probably shocked. And she just grunted and walked on by. And then halfway in the evening, she smiled at me as I walked past, which was surprising, but nice, but surprising. And then at the end of the evening, when we're all getting ready to go home, pack up and go home, I went and shook hands with her ex-partner and thanked him for making it such a magical day for my daughter. And then I went up to my ex and I kissed her on the cheek and I thanked her for making it such a magical day. And I don't know if you guys understand how I felt, in as much as I needed to thank them. I still have this problem with being all friendly with her. Not because of what she is now, just because of what she was then. And she didn't steal my child away, but she made my life as difficult as she could. And she moved her away. And I know she moved her away and she had much nicer surroundings because you can buy an awful lot more with your money down in the countryside. But nevertheless, it was a mission to go and see her. And she stopped the more regular contact. And to this day, I always feel as if I lost a lot of her childhood, and I struggle with that. Let me know your comments. How would you feel? Are you in the same position? How do you feel? And if she sees this, which I doubt she will, because I'm sure she doesn't even know about this site and what I do. But if she does see this, there's no malice involved. I wish you a healthy and happy life. But I struggle to forget. I struggle to forget the shitty things that you did and how her childhood, a lot of it, was taken away from me by your own selfish motives. As I say, I have no problem being with you, being around you, and I'll always be civil, I'll always be polite. I just can't be your friend.